right? The Bible tells us, and we looked at the scripture where it said, break up the fallow ground, that you can plant seeds of righteousness, but if you don't do something to break up that ground and allow that seed to penetrate the ground, you will not experience the harvest that you're thinking you want to experience. So you have to begin to deal with the ground, and we talked about doing groundwork. We said the groundwork means that you have proper connection, right? That proper connection means that I'm connected properly for my life. And when we talked about, we used the example that whenever you plant a new building, the first two things that they make sure of is that there is connection to water and there is connection to power. And in our lives, we need a connection to water, which is the word, and we need a connection to the power, which is the power of God. And if you are in a place where you do not have those connections, the building may go up, but it may not be it may not fulfill everything that was designed to fulfill if you don't have the proper connections. And then we said that you have to do some things to the ground also. You have to clear out the things that have grown there. There's some stuff that's grown in our lives, envy and jealousy and greed, and those things that have grown in our lives. We have to deal with the things that people have dumped on our lives. Just as we look around in Levine and things have been dumped in the ground, we have to deal with the things that have been dumped in our lives. The resentment or the rejection that have been dumped in our lives. And then we have to deal with the things that have been built there, our own ideas, our own thoughts about what we're supposed to do. We have to deal with those things. And so today I want to take a look at the vision of a blueprint. All right? Let's go to Habakkuk chapter 2, beginning at verse 3. And it says this: the vision is for a future time. It describes the end and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. It will not be delayed. Again, the vision is for what? A future time. The vision is not for the present, it is for a future time. And it describes the end, and the Bible says that it will be fulfilled. So the things that God wants to do in and through you, it is not for maybe not right now, but it is for a future time. Understand this, that God is never really concerned about the beginning of a thing. God is never really concerned about what it looks like at the beginning. He is always looking at what it will be. He looks at the current state, but his focus is where will it be. In other words, he doesn't look at the seed and say this is all that there is. He looks at what happens when the seed is planted and what the future will be of that seed. He looks at your current state of your life and he looks at the future of your life. He's not concerned with your current situation as much as he's concerned with where he's going to take you. God is always concerned about the future of a thing, not necessarily the present of a thing. It's why he sees the end from the beginning. He sees the end from the beginning because the beginning is just the starting off point. I don't get excited about a beginning thing until I consider what the end thing is. Y'all with me? Yes. He says, I know the plans, the future that I have for you. It's the reason he told Jeremiah, before you were in your mother's womb, I appointed you. God is not concerned about the beginning of the thing. He's always looking at where he's putting it, where he's taking it to. And so your future and your purpose may seem delayed, but God is working it out. It may seem like it's not working out the way you thought it would work out, but understand that God is not concerned about where you are right now because he knows where he's taking you. Yeah. Let's take a look at some lessons from some other blueprint holders, if you will. In the 6 through 8 chapters of Genesis, and we're not going to turn there, but we know the stories of Noah, right? So Noah was a man who found favor in God's eyes. When God was looking around at the current state of man, he was looking at mankind, and mankind was in a pretty dark space. And so he said, I'm going to appoint this man, Noah, to build an ark that will be able to preserve the people that I'm assigned to him for the season through this flood, because I'm going to wipe out everything else. And so he's building this ark. But Noah was purposed to build something for an event that had never happened up until that time. See, Noah was told, I'm going to flood the earth, but the Bible tells us that the earth had never been flooded before. So Noah is building something for something that he has no idea what it's actually going to look like. The fact is that if you told me when we first moved here to Phoenix and they told us about haboob, I had no idea what a haboob was. And so they tell me to prepare for the haboob, and to my mind, I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? It's that same thing that Noah had. God told him, prepare for the flood, and Noah was probably like, wait, what do you mean flood? We've never had, I'm on dry ground. What do you mean flood? Yeah. So he's building this ark in the middle of a dry place for something that he has no idea will ever happen. And something that he's never seen. Sometimes the thing that God has purposed you for will not make sense.
Wow.
Sometimes the thing that God has put in your heart does not make sense, and you've not seen anything like it before. The ministry that God has called you to, the business that God has put in your heart, those things, the marriage that you may have, you are looking at something that God has purposed in your heart that you may have never seen before. Something that you never thought would happen in your life. God is putting that in your heart as a purpose. It will not make sense based upon your current situation or your current understanding. Where you are right now, when God begins to drop a blueprint in your heart, it does not make sense to you where you are right now. Noah was in the middle of field, basically. In the middle of dry ground. And God is telling him to build something that is built for water. Noah was not necessarily someone who was a fisherman by nature. Nothing in the scripture tells us that Noah was a fisherman by trade. So therefore, there's nothing that would give us the impression that Noah was very familiar with water. But he was being told to prepare something for something that he had never seen or experienced. And some of you right now are being told by God, there's a blueprint that God is writing on your heart, that you are being prepared for something that you've never seen and you've never thought about. But when he puts a blueprint in your heart, it's not for the present, it's for the future. He has problems. God is creating solutions to problems that have yet to arise.
Come on now.
Things that you didn't even think were supposed to take place or you never imagined. Now God is preparing something for you and in you that is for what's about to happen.
Yeah.
The blueprints of a house many times are designed before anyone even buys the house. When we built our house, and I said we built our house, but understand the blueprint was already there.
Yeah.
The blueprint was already in the builder's hands. They had already figured out, they didn't care who was going to buy the house. They knew that the house was going to go there, and they simply said, we're going to create this blueprint. Sometimes the thing that God is preparing in you is for something yet to come.
Yeah.
God has placed you on the earth at this very moment with your experience, with your understanding, because there is use for you. I say it all the time. If you can breathe, if you have the breath of God in your body, then there's something that God still has for you to do. And what he is revealing and showing you, it may not make sense in this moment, but in the time to come, it will all make sense. You won't understand why you're going through what you're going through, but at the end of the day, when you get to the fullness of what God has designed for your life, you will see how it all begin to make sense. There's some things in my life that I look back and like, God, why did I have to go through that? God, why did I have to endure this? Why did I have to find anger here? And why did I have to deal with rejection here? Why did I have to deal with this person? Why did I have to go through that bad relationship? But now on the other side of some things, it begins to make sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't understand why doors close, but understand that God is sometimes moving you along the hallway to the next place. At the end of the day, you may hear God's voice telling you to go back to school, start a business, get a skill, what have you. But at the end of the day, it does not make sense to you now, but in the future it will all make sense. The other thing you have to understand this, that there will be different responses to the blueprint that God has for you. We find in Matthew 24 that Jesus says his return will be like it was in Noah's day when people were eating and drinking and proceeding with life, unaware of what was happening. Now, I know many times when we hear talk about Moses that it's talked about, well, he was ridiculed and people were talking about him, but I can't find that in the scriptures. I can't find in the scriptures where it tells us that Moses suffered ridicule. What we really find is that, Noah, that Noah suffered ridicule. We don't see that in the scriptures. What we do see is that he did this, he built this ark, and no one else seemed to care. Sometimes when God has put a blueprint in your heart, some people that you think should care don't care.
Right.
Sometimes it seems like you think you're trying to save the world, and you're like, I'm saving the world, this is what God has gifted me to do, what God has planned for me to do, and nobody gives a flying fig newt.
Come on now.
Nobody seems to care about what you're doing. Some people, you have to understand that some people will not embrace what God is calling you to do. I can tell you that even when we started this church, I had conversations with people, and we would tell them we're starting this church. And the response we got was almost literally, that's great, let me know when this gets started. That sounds good, but I'm going to keep going over here to this church that is not really meeting my needs, but it's where my grandma went. When you're doing what God has called you to do, don't be upset if people don't run and jump and scream because you're doing it. Don't be upset when people don't see it with the same fervor that you saw it with. Understand that God gave you the vision. He didn't give it to them.
Come on now.
And sometimes people can't see what God showed you because he didn't show it to them.
Yeah.
So you have to have enough vision of God inside of you to keep moving towards it, even when there is no support. Even when the people that you know that you're building the ark for, that would benefit from the ark, when they could care less, they go on about their lives, you have to have enough within you to continue building,
Come on now.
to continue moving forward, to continue pushing forward, even though the people that you think should support you don't.
Yeah.
Even though the people that you think should have your back don't. You have to have enough within you to say, God called me to do this, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
So when you understand the blueprint of God, you understand that you may not see it right now, and other people don't see it at all, but when you see what God showed you, and you got to keep moving towards that thing.
Yeah.
The thing is that sometimes some of the changes that you need to make in your life will also need to be made will happen, and no one seems to care. There may be some things that God is calling you to do, to calling you to change in your life. Some connections that you need to make, some connections that you need to disconnect. Maybe God is calling you to do some things, and it will seem like people don't care and don't support you. You've got to keep moving forward. There are some things that you will be striving for, and people will not be excited for you. The other thing you have to understand is on the flip side, you may be like Joseph. When Joseph had the vision and the dream of God, when God showed him who he was supposed to be and that he was supposed to be a deliverer for his people, what he found was that they wanted to kill him. Sometimes when you're moving forward, people that you thought would have your back actually hate you for it. I was saying that if you have haters, haters are a sign that you're moving in the right direction. Because what happens is that when you start making a move and start moving forward, because it disrupts the plans of other people, they hate you for it. Come here, Daryl. So Daryl and I are here together, and we're just going through life and not doing anything. Daryl's pretty comfortable with it, right? Because I'm not trying to get ahead of him. I'm just with him right now, right? But when I begin to move forward, what happens is that because I may be have been with Daryl for this moment, because I'm moving forward, now it causes him some friction as he's being left behind. And he hates me because I'm moving forward while he's stuck where he is. And the problem is that many times when you find yourself flowing with the vision of God, you'll find people that you thought that were once with you, and they're only with you because you are doing nothing just like they are. You're not going anywhere just like they are, and they're comfortable with you being in the same place they are. But the moment you begin to move forward in God, they hate you for it. Why? Because they see that you're moving forward and they're still where they are. Thank you, Karen. You've got to understand that you have got to recognize that not everyone will feel the same way about you. Some people will not respond to the blueprint or the plan or the vision that God has for you the same way you're thinking they will. And that's the reason why you have to make sure you're connected right. See, you have to be around people that are speaking the same language as you. One of the things that Pastor Tarsha and I, we talked about, when she talked about the convocation of world changers in our All Nations Network, some of you don't know the story behind how we got connected there. When we launched this church, one of the things that we did was we made sure we had covering. Because we recognized that as a church, we could not and would not function well without having covering. It's out of order, if you will. And so we needed to make sure that we were in order. And so because of a previous connection in ministry that we had, we connected in one place. And it was a good connection, but it wasn't a great connection. It was a good place that covered us. It was a good place that helped us, but we needed people that were getting to speak our language. And understand, we need to make sure that when we were expressing the vision of God for our lives, the vision of God for this church, that we had people that could support that and would support it. And so when we made the switch over to the All Nations Network, what we did was we said we need a place that is going to help us move forward and not just sit there and look at us. We needed a place that was going to add value to our lives and help us to see the vision of God. That's why you need to make sure where you're connected is important. It's the reason I believe that some people are in churches for the wrong reasons. Some people are in churches because their grandmother's name was on the roll, because their uncle has the fellowship hall is named after their uncle, and they're not there because it's feeding them. They're not there because it's pushing them forward. And so therefore, that's why I say you have to make sure you are properly connected. You can't be around people that came up like you and expect them to always be moving forward with you. Day ones are great. We're in a society right now where everybody wants to talk about day ones. In other words, people you knew from a long time ago, right? Your day one friends. But how many know just because you were day one with me doesn't mean you were meant for day 4,892? Just because I grew up with you doesn't mean that you're meant to be with me in my future. Now, that does not mean that I just let people go all of a sudden just because I let them go. But there are some people that are designed for my future and some people that are designed just for a season. So I have to understand and recognize that their response may tell me where they belong in my life. The other thing is this, is that your blueprint will face adversity. As you're moving forward, you have to understand that your blueprint will bring adversity to your life. The ark that Noah was called to build was not the end. It was not the end of the story when Noah built the ark. But the ark was the vehicle that God was using to get him on the other side of the flood. Many times the blueprint, the vision that God has for your life is not the end result. Many times it's the thing that's designed to move you to the next phase in your life. It's the thing that's designed to move you forward in your purpose, forward in your future. But if you get to that point and think that's the end all and be all, then you've lost all hope. The blueprint was designed to get him through the storm and the flood. What is God trying to get in your life that's getting you beyond this current storm and this current adversity? God has put a plan and a purpose in your life that he's trying to use to get you beyond the calamity and beyond the adversity. The fact is that you will go through storms trying to accomplish what God has called you to do. If you think that you're facing a storm and it's a sign that you're out of the will of God, I point out to you that many times a storm is simply your past versus your future. Many times when you're facing, remember we talked about lessons from the storm. Many times when you're facing a storm, it is because your past is at conflict with your future. And so therefore there's a storm that is happening in your life because where you're trying to go and where God is pulling you to now conflicts with what happened in your past. And so you will face adversity, you will face a calamity when you are in your blueprint. The promises of God and the plans of God often bring conflict between your past and your future. Who I used to be and who God is making me into. And so yes, and they even tell us that when your body is, when you're making health changes in your nutrition, that your body will oftentimes go through changes. You may not feel as well at the beginning. Why? Because what used to sustain you doesn't sustain you any longer. What used to keep you good no longer keeps you good, and now you're finding that you're changing things. And so therefore, what you have to understand is that when you are facing a storm, many times when you're facing a storm and looking forward to what God is doing, is because there is a change that is happening for your good. The fact is that you are facing adversity in the pursuit of what God has shown you, and it is part of the process. I wish I could tell you that everything gets all better and gets all great the moment you sell out to God. The moment you say, God, I will, all of a sudden everything goes well. I wish that were the case. But I can tell you from my own life that there have been times when I've said, God, whatever you want me to do, and all of a sudden chaos starts to break out. Okay. The beginning of this year, we were at Fire Conference. This is why I want you all to begin to thinking about going to these places with us. Why? Because we need you to experience what we're experiencing. Because as we move forward, we got to move forward as a tribe. So if you can't make World Changers, make Fire Conference in January. Can't make Fire Conference, we'll have something else coming up. But begin to think about setting aside for some of these trips. Well, we were at Fire Conference earlier this year. And God began to speak, God began to move. I mean, we woke up and Pastor Tosh began to prophesy to me like that. I mean, I'm barely getting the crust out of my eyes. Literally, right? Barely getting the crust out of my eyes, and God began speaking. And my answer was, yes, God, whatever you say. That was on, Saturday morning? It was Saturday morning when we were about to head back. That Wednesday, my job that I was working ended. Later that month, or later this year, early this year, but later on, Pastor Tarsh's job ending. So the storm began to hit our life. But it was because the blueprint of God was now being made manifest in our life. Understand that when you are facing a storm, and if you think about even when you're building something, the building doesn't go up without some form of violence. Nails get hammered into places. Screws get screwed into stuff. And some of the parts of your life, God is hammering some stuff, God is screwing some stuff, God is messing up, and it does not look good. In fact, when they're building a house, it's just tools and junk left all over the place, right? Because they're working on building it. And the end result doesn't look as good, what it looks like right now doesn't look as good as when the house is completed. And when God is working through your life, when you're in your blueprint, God is doing some things that may not look good. It may look a little messy at times. But he's doing it because the end result is what he's trying to get to. And the end result never looks good, can't look good without the problems of the building process, right? The other thing is this. God's blueprint is never just about you. His blueprint is never just about you. It's never just about your situation and your circumstance. What we find is that whenever God has designed something, whenever God has put a plan in place on the earth, it is always about more than just one person. Yes, you may be the person that is designed to bring it forward, but it's not just for you. We find that when God was giving Noah the assignment, he gave him the assignment to build the ark, but he said, build it and then take your family with you, take 2 of each animal with you, and take enough vegetation for all of you all. So he gave him an assignment that was beyond just Noah. Noah was the one that found favor. Noah was the one that was out building, but it was beyond more than just Noah. It was about his family. It was about everyone else. When God gave Joseph a blueprint, it included him, it included his family, it included all of Egypt. God never gives a blueprint just for one person. He never gives one thing just for one person. It's always about the people that are assigned to your life. It's always about the people that are assigned to you. It's about your family. It's about your generations. It's about people that you may not even know. But his assignment, his blueprint is always about more than just you. In fact, it's why Jesus, when Jesus was praying, one of his final prayers was for those that God had given him. Jesus, yes, was the one that was called to drink from the cup. Jesus was the one that was called to go to Calvary. However, it was not just about him. It was about all of mankind. And so if you have in your mind that the blueprint is about you getting you wealthy or you having notoriety, then you've missed out on what God is trying to do in your life. The fact is that whenever God gives you something, it is about more than just you. And so the thing that I'm also cautious of is this, is that if it's about more than just me, I don't want someone else's blood on my hands. I don't want someone else to miss God because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I don't want someone else to have to go through things that they shouldn't go through because I'm not willing to deal with the issues that I need to deal with. I'm smart enough to recognize that when God has put something on my life, it's not just about me. It's about you guys. It's about the people that are coming. It's about this city. Why? Because I recognize that the blueprint of God is not just about my life. It's not just about this moment. It's not just about me being wealthy. It's not just about me being famous. It's not just about anything concerning me. In fact, can I be honest? It really got nothing to do with you. Because remember I said the plan of God ultimately is to reveal Christ? So if he's revealing Christ, if he's going to use you in the plan and the vision that he has for your life, it's really not about you, but it's about him. It's about Christ being glorified. That's why he says, Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men to me. But if you're lifting yourself up, if you're setting the blueprint just for your life, just for you to be glorified, then you can't move forward with what God really wants you to do. Because the ultimate thing that God wants to do is see Christ glorified. Let's go ahead and stand. The fact of the matter is this, is that God has a plan for your life. Whether you realize it or not, whether you like it or not, whether you understand it or not, God has a plan for your life. God has never put anything on the earth that did not fit into his plan. There's some animals that we may look at and say, God, what were you thinking with that? But understand that every person that God has put on the earth, God is looking at you and saying, I have a plan and a purpose for your life. Just like he told Jeremiah, before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you and I had a plan for you. And so hopefully that what you've gotten out of this month is that God has a plan for your life. I can't tell you specifically what your plan is. If God reveals it, God will reveal it to Pastor Tarsha and I, but he many times wants to reveal it to you because he wants to give you the strategy for it.
Yes.
We may give you a word to help you move forward in it, but ultimately he begins to speak to you about what he wants to do in your life. And when Pastor Tarsha and I give a word, it's simply to confirm what God has already been speaking to you. And sometimes he gives us the word because you're not listening to what he said. Can I just be honest?
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is that God has a plan for each and every one of us. And one of the things that we are endeavoring to do at this church is to empower you what? To do what God called you to do. It's the reason that we're going to have, and I say this and we're making plans, we're going to have evangelism training and prophetic training. We're going to have different kinds of trainings. Why? Because we want to make sure that you are empowered to do what God has called you to do and fulfill the blueprint that God has for your life. Let's just pray. And if you need prayer for any reason, the altar is open.